troubles. But YouTube, why are you taking off? Oh, you've made me live. Okay, fair enough. Well then. Hello, everybody. Welcome to my usual state of confusion with the New York Review of Science Fiction when we have Amy Goldschlager wrangling you, the audience, and Barbara Krasnoff wrangling myself and Kate Elliott. And so when I'm in the host position and not engineering, I get even more confused than usual, which is to say a lot. But welcome back. We're in our 32nd season, I believe. And numbers confuse me. Hour of the Wolf is in its 52nd season, or finished 52 seasons. No, in its 53rd. But for those three people out there who don't know, Kate Elliott is best known for writing interesting novels based in the science fiction, romance, young adult, and fantasy genres. She has flourished in her writing career with a number of widely popular novel series. I've got like one entire series sitting over there threatening to collapse at an old table. It's wonderful stuff. Kate was born in Junction City, Oregon. I'm going to leave out the year. In the beginning, she used to write science fiction novels under a different name, but after a few moderate successes, the publisher stopped publishing her novels as they were looking for fresh names. I'm going to make this short by saying, so they created a fresh name, that name being Kate Elliott. And on my saying those words, why don't we bring Kate Elliott on screen? There she is.
I was just checking to see if my dog had come up the stairs, but he hasn't. He's sulking.
Yeah. When Malka Older's daughter was about a year and a half old, and she was up on the stage reading, the daughter kept running up on stage to get hugs from mommy, and then run back over to either daddy or to brother, her uncle Daniel Older, and to have a baby running up and down, and Malka never skipped a beat. It was great.
Yeah.
So
that's how dogs, it should be.
Yeah. While studying at college, Kate became an active member of the SCA. A few people will know that means that's a Society for Creative Anachronism, and also pursued medieval style sword fighting. As of today, Kate has become successful in establishing herself as a noteworthy author. Well, we knew that already. She also considered herself blessed to have a loving husband in the form of J. Silverstein. It does not say here that he's an archaeologist. They live together in Hawaii, where Kate continues. What?
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Should I skip all this?
No. I'm sorry.
There's another 2 pages to go.
I know it's live. I'm finding this so funny because it's old. It's old. I'm not in that marriage anymore. I was born in Des Moines, Iowa, but I was raised in Junction City. But I have 3 fabulous children.
Why don't you?
And I live in Hawaii.
I'm
sorry. It was the loving husband was the. I'm sorry. I'm cool about it now.
Dear.
But it was rough for a while, and I don't usually talk about stuff online because that's my background. But anyway, I had to stop.
I will send you the URL. I will send you the address and much more. I saw this exact same bio somewhere else, and I will send you those addresses.
It's fine. These things propagate themselves, and you can't get rid of the old things, which is good in some ways and then funny and unexpected in other ways. Yeah. Anyway, thank you for having me on.
What I was really trying to get from this was not the biography, but more importantly, the bibliography, which is when printed out is 2.5 pages. And I think that should tell people. I'm just going to name the series of books. Okay.
Oh, okay. All right.
And I know these are not in order because the first thing is the High Road trilogy. But weren't
Mhm.
the Jaren books the first?
No, High Road is first. The High
High
Road
Road is
trilogy is
first.
first. The novels of the
So
Duran are next.
Duran, right? I should have remembered that from last time. But that was what? When did we do this last? You were actually in New York.
That was in 2013, though. That was for the
Yeah.
spirit. That was for the Spirit Walker trilogy, the Cold Magic,
Yes,
the one that starts with
absolutely.
Cold Magic. But between
Yeah,
Cold Magic
I've
and
got
Duran is the Crown of Stars series, which is that big pile of
right.
books you mentioned, that big
That's,
pile of books, and then the Crossroads trilogy, and then Spirit,
yeah.
the Cold Magic trilogy, then the YA fantasy trilogy, Court of Fives, and Black Wolves, and now the space opera trilogy that I'm working on now, and
And
a couple of
there's a
short,
few
and
others.
then two new novellas.
Right, and some
And I might be
Magic
missing
the
something.
Gathering
Yeah.
stuff.
Oh yeah,
Oh
yeah,
no,
yeah, yeah, yeah. The Magic the Gathering stuff. Yeah.
oh yeah, I mean, let's see what else. Yeah, short story collections, Golden Key.
Yeah.
Um,
I think we got
uh,
everything.
yeah, I think we've got it at this point, except for the fact that just between this month and is it late March, you've got 2 more books.
So, well, Keeper 6, which I'll hold up here, it just came out, and it's a short little. It wasn't
Why don't we put
it's
that on screen?
yeah, it was. It's a little longer than a novella, so it's a very short novel, like 55,000 words, I think. And it's actually my first contemporary fantasy. All my other works have been either alternate fantasy, alternate Earth fantasy, or secondary world fantasy, or science fiction / space opera. And this is the first one
Yeah.
that set actually in. It's a contemporary fantasy. It begins on Oahu. The main character is Jewish, and that's it's not a major part of the story, but it's an important part of who she is and how she deals with things. And it's a story of, well, I wanted to tell a story about parents and children. And usually so often when we tell stories about parents and children, we focus on young children. But of course, kids grow up and you still have a relationship with them, or many people do, not always, of course. And I wanted to tell the story of a mother who has to rescue her kidnapped adult son. And not in the Liam Neeson going out with guns blazing kind of way. That she has to use her wits and her knowledge and her negotiating skills and her stubbornness. And this is a portal fantasy, so there's a whole because I couldn't make it simple. So there's a whole other beyond Oahu. And I also wanted to write a little bit of a love letter to Oahu, because so many of the shows like Hawaii 5-0 that are set in Hawaii are really written for the mainland. They're not really set here. They're written for a Hawaii. They're not really local. They're written for a Hawaii that's meant to be something that tourists will want to come visit. And it's not really how it is. So I wanted to it's a very low key setting. It's just, that's how, and I wanted to show just that little slice of Oahu, also in writing it.
That's neat. You haven't put any of the islands of Hawaii in your previous books, have you?
No, I have never written a contemporary fantasy before. I don't even think I have written a contemporary short fiction before. Maybe, I mean, I might have and forgotten, but I don't think so.
Yeah. So this is, beg pardon. So this is actually really cool. Extra.
I hope so.
After all those books. And also this is closer to secondary world science fiction.
Well, I mean, it's
even
very
though it
much
has
more in the
magic.
tradition of what they call urban fantasy, what is called it's well, I don't urban fantasy is kind of an odd term because they often don't take place in cities, but it's contemporary fantasy. It's people in the
Yeah.
modern world who bring their very modern views of how to deal with things, and then they go into other areas. Yeah. So the portal is not scientific at all. It's fantasy. Um,
Okay.
so yeah,
Fair enough.
yeah.
Have you written science fiction?
Have I written science fiction? I wrote the High Road trilogy,
Hard science
which
fiction.
is
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, the
Yeah.
High Road
Which,
trilogy and the Geron books, and then the
that,
the Sun Chronicles, which is my gender swapped Alexander the Great in space. So Unconquerable Sun came out 2 years ago, and if you can hear my dog barking, I
that,
apologize.
that,
I don't know what he's barking
no,
at.
the
Yeah,
dog
and
should apologize. You're not barking.
no, and the second volume in the series, Furious Heaven, is coming out in April.
Right.
So
Okay. So
and it's
yeah,
really, and this is big
I should
ticket
have remembered because
space opera.
I have read the Geron books,
Yeah.
all of them, all four, and so I should have remembered that was well. Okay, maybe a question that I should have known, but still, we have a nice audience out there, or we will by the time people watch the archives. And I'll be broadcasting this on Hour of the Wolf, my radio show, on Monday, so we'll get a whole lot of people hearing this, and they may not know that information. Um, would you like to start reading sooner?
I
Would you rather
will.
just chat?
I'm
Okay.
fine either way, but I'm happy to read. This is a kind of the equivalent of a short story. It's chapter 12 from Furious Heaven, and since Jim particularly was excited about space opera, it's chapter 12
And
is
new, something that hasn't been published
and
yet.
something that isn't out yet. Yes, yes.
Right.
So hold on. I'll take a sip of water. And this chapter is called Introducing the Valiant One. And I want to just briefly say that this is a secondary character who does not appear in book one, which is one reason that I thought this was a good introductory chapter, even though it's chapter 12. The wreck hung in space, cold. What? Chase, what? No. Wait, is what confusing? Oh, can you mute? I'll start over. Are we good? Are we all good? Tell me in host chat. Are we good? Yes. Okay. Chapter 12, Introducing the Valiant One. The wreck hung in space, cold and dead, amid an accumulation of dust. Ensign the Honorable Mackinday Bow's initial sensor sweep detected no heat, no particle drift, nothing. Kind of like the career he'd hoped for, scuppered and set adrift. Who would be raiding out here, he remarked to the duty crew, including himself as officer of the watch. There were 3, although the bridge of a picket ship normally took a complement of 7. Or trading out here, there's no one to trade with and nowhere to go. A hit job by one of the cartels, suggested Comms Petty Officer First Class Sergui Alsura as she exchanged a glance with Chief Sharu Kinji Aligos, who sat at the helm. Mackinday shook his head. The cartels protect shipping. As long as you pay them, Ensign. Don't they teach that at the Royal Academy? Mackinday stiffened as he considered cutting retorts. But with a controlled exhale, he decided an enlisted assigned to a lowly patrol circuit at the ass end of nowhere could not possibly be deliberately insulting and honorable of Bow House, even if she didn't know who his grandmother was. Anyway, as data flowed in, the boxy formation that might have held cargo containers flattened out to become the smooth, sleek lines of a warship. He grunted with adrenaline-charged surprise. Holy hells! It's not one of ours. Chief, send in a Hornet. Alsura, sound general quarters. Again, the spacer and the chief exchanged a glance. McKinday was the youngest on the Sunbird by 20 years. Veteran reservists bearing the scars of war hadn't felt any need to be welcoming when a high-ranking honorable, fresh out of the Royal Academy, had been tossed into their tight-knit crew. But they obeyed. A light blinked green. The picket ship gave an infinitesimal shudder, and the outside cameras picked up a visual of a three-lobed Hornet-class drone speeding away toward the Hulk. After the alarm sounded, Guialsura spoke into the 1MC. General quarters, all hands, man your battle stations, proceed up and forward to starboard, down and aft to port, set condition 1 throughout the ship, reason for general quarters, unknown contact on sensors. The alarm blared again. By now, the Hornet was too far away to track visually. Its heat trail left a wispy thread on the sensor display. Alsura, open a secure line to Koza to report a hostile. The hatch whined, whirred, and finally lurched open. Commander Situri Ren Alvia Salaria wheeled herself onto the bridge, short hair standing up in a spiky mess and duty tunic rumpled as if she'd rolled straight out of her rack. She blinked sleep out of her eyes as she clicked through views of the sensor sweep. Her scarred lip curled as she glanced toward McKinday. Belay the comms to Koza. Proceed with the secondary sweep, Ensign. Then she addressed the other two. I'll be back with tea. Carry on. She wheeled herself out. The hatch shut behind her with a flatulent hiss. The seal needed repair, but the fleet couldn't spare parts for a backwater picket ship that functioned well enough on spit and baling wire. Tea? Shouldn't this be immediately reported to Koza? Isn't that mandated procedure? Guialsura gave him a look. Ensign, with respect, we all know you're a corehouse scion. She made the word sound like brat. While the commander came up through the ranks the hard way with a stellar service record and the commendations to back it up. Feel free to report me for saying so, but we citizens have the right to speak our minds, even to the Queen Marshal. McKinday was too surprised to object to this scolding. Of the 41 members of the crew, Sayre had been the only friendly in his long weeks aboard, or maybe he only thought so because her gruff demeanor reminded him of his no-nonsense grandmother. Like his grandmother, she kept on talking, never one to stint on a good smackdown. It's pretty clear an honorable like you must have offended someone very high up to get slapped down this hard into such a junk duty station. She paused, as if waiting to see if he would finally confide in them. He would not. With a sigh, she bent back over her console, fielding queries from elsewhere on the ship as the crew sought information. The chief was running a check through the weapons system, which at best might hold off a space-suited Carnotaur. After confirming there was no other bogey within a 10,000-click range, McKinday scanned back toward the planet they'd passed by a few hours ago. At that time, he'd done a thorough scan of its abandoned orbital habitat and various bits of in-orbit debris, gutted ships, broken satellites, and long, empty zero-G factories. No trace of life or artificial energy had shown up then, and he didn't expect any to show up now, but he was going to be thorough all over again. Odrissa Sept was a terrestrial world with a sluggish white and pink cloud cover filled with toxins. Its massive beacon drew the eye like a spiral moon gravitationally tethered to the planet. In the first 1,000 years of post-landfall settlement, all transportation between star systems in the local belt was controlled by argosies with their canoe drives. After the Apsara's convergent built the beacon routes, the dynamic changed radically. Instead of a months or years-long canoe passage, a ship could drop through a beacon and emerge an instant later from its linked beacon in another star system. In just this way, the other beacon in Odrissa system, which was anchored to Odrissa Prime, connected to Pselka's system. The route led back into the heart of the Republic. 800 years ago, parts of the beacon network had collapsed for reasons no one understood. Many beacons had failed. This was one of those. No ships would ever enter or exit this beacon again. An aura of garish colors shimmered inside its coil and spilled outward to create an undulating halo the little picket ship carefully avoided. Whatever had killed the beacon had infected the previously habitable planet and its orbital habitat and factories as well. The loss of its second beacon had turned Odrissa's system from a busy Janus through route into a terminus system, a dead end. Like his military career, which hadn't even gotten off the ground before it had died and been sent here to this tomb of a posting. Guialsura wasn't wrong, which was why he couldn't feel exercised over her plain speaking. Nothing new appeared because he'd done his sweep correctly the first time. He switched his view back to the Hornet, clearing the last 100 clicks to the wreck. Oi, hold on, look here. The other two clipped over. What are we looking at? Guialsura asked in a calm tone at odds with the gravity of the situation. There's a blot inside the hull, blocking normal background radiation. He indicated an area with an odd matte black finish that seemed to be hanging inside the outlines of the big wreck. It could be a shielded compartment. Here's a trickle of energy like leakage. Might be a battery on low power mode. Might be life support. You think people could be alive in there? Both the Fiend and the Yele have shields that can block heat signatures, so maybe? The chief made a noise, quickly stifled, but when McKinday looked his way, the man had hunched low over his console, face hidden. He was an old-timer whose jaw had been blown off during one of the Queen Marshall's campaigns, which must mean he had a lot of bad memories. It's weird, though, McKinday went on. Wouldn't there be a record of an enemy ship arriving through Selka's beacon, especially if it happened in the wake of last year's battle? Wouldn't we have been alerted that a hostile was in system? The Hornet pinged an alert. He tweaked the visual to grab an image of abrasions etched into the hull where a ship's registry number would usually be found. Then he dumped the image into an analysis program and let the Hornet hover outside the ship while he awaited a result. He kept his gaze on the sensors, alert for any sign of an enemy sailing out of nowhere. Even so, his thoughts began to drift. He should never have offended the governor of Bauhaus in the first place, but there was no point in mending the pen after the ankylosauruses were lost. Honestly, it had felt so good to see that lewd worm cringe and blush in front of the entire assembled house. No one else was willing to call out the man, even knowing what he'd done. Yet even after all the whispers of gratitude and encrypted messages of thanks, he was the one assigned to a backwater border system in retribution. Meanwhile, every other member of his academy cohort had either fought in the Battle of Molosia or would be fitting up for the long-awaited assault on Carno's system. News took so long to get here that the campaign would be over before he heard about it. Just his cursed luck. The hatch clunked twice before scraping open. The commander wheeled in with a tray of bulbs, steaming with hot tea. Sir, get supply up here to look at that hatch again. I know this tub is old and we get the refurbished repair kits, but this is ridiculous. What do we have to do to get... She broke off as she registered the Hornet's visual field. Ah, here we go. Shouldn't we wait for a registry number? McKinday asked. With those abrasions and given it's a Fiend ship, we might never get one. How do you know it's a Fiend ship? Looks like a Yele frigate. There are breakaway Yele factions allied with the Fiend, not to mention Yele-class ships used by Scuda Marauders, Gatoi Arrows, and independents like the Franklin Gang. Ensign, look at the hull. Those two sawed-off spurs are where the double helix component of a Fiend torch drive would have been attached. The question you should be asking is, who has the capacity to remove a drive so cleanly without being in a shipyard? Chief, can you take the Hornet in? The chief guided the Hornet through an airlock passage that had been left open all the way into an inner staging compartment. Who leaves airlocks open to deliberately vent a compartment? McKinday asked. The commander didn't look up from the visual. It could be attackers or defenders, or an accident or a malfunction, or an artifact of systems failure. They watched the probe's cameras scan the inner compartment with its racks for vacuum suits and a stacked complement of the hover chariots the Fiend used for ground combat. Annoyed that he'd missed the helix drive, McKinday said, "A Fiend destroyer can't land in atmosphere, so it's odd they have chariots. The only explanation is they were intended to be transferred to an accompanying gunship. Fiend gunships can dock with this specific configuration of airlock, but are limited to in-system travel because they're not big enough for beacon drives." "Thank you for the academy lesson, Ensign." The commander's dead-even tone fell like a scalding rebuke. McKinday counted to 10 in his head before adding, "I'm just saying it might help us figure out where this destroyer came from and why it's here. It can't have been part of the recent attack on Molosia because there was no ground attack involved." There was a ground attack in conjunction with the Molosia engagement. "Oh, that's right. The raid on the industrial park on Kaonia Prime. The one Princess Sun responded to before anyone else knew it was happening." "That was some battle," agreed Gwialsura, tone warming with approval. "Humble Sedka's citizen cadets holding their own against Fiend's special forces." Was the comment meant as a slam at honorable Royal Academy graduates like him? He said, "The princess took command. An heir to be proud of. We are lucky to have her." Gwialsura paused, then said, "You must have been at the Royal Academy with her." He shrugged. "Sure, but she was 3 cohorts ahead of me, so we only overlapped by 1 year. She has her own bodyguard and her own companions. A junior scrub like me would never have gotten anywhere near her orbit." The chief tapped his console to interrupt. The hatch between the inner compartment and the passageway beyond already stood open, left that way, just like the airlocks. The chief paused the drone at the rim of the hatch and had it extrude a camera filament through the opening for a scan of the corridor's length. McKinday found himself holding his breath as the view scanned aft and forward, not sure what carnage they would see. The bulkheads were intact, painted with elaborate images of feasting and hunting. Every hatch within view stood open as if someone had decided to flush all atmosphere out of the ship. No sign of life, no wreckage or random drifting items. The Hornet took its time working a path aft along the corridor, poking extrusions into each compartment. Everything was shipshape, stowed tight, locked up, like they'd abandoned ship hoping to return. In a cabin, some joker had left an empty cup affixed to the fold-out desk and taped the left hand of a small figurine to the cup's handle, as if the figurine had just finished drinking. "What in the hells?" McKinday gave a startled laugh. The figurine depicted a winged individual with breast-hugging white body armor who held a Caudicus staff in their right hand. "It looks like one of my little brother's toys." "It's a figure of one of their saints," said the commander, "which is some cursed kind of slops bucket worship, if you ask me. All manner of rubbish cant about personal dedication and individual goals instead of veneration of the ancestors and respect for community." "Sure, but think about having enough presence of mind to keep your sense of humor while your ship is dying around you," retorted McKinday. "It was probably some loner of an ensign," said Gwialsura with a dry look. He grinned. "I'd absolutely do it if I had time before I asphyxiated." Even the commander cracked an unexpected smile. The chief's vocoder croaked in a harsh metallic monotone. "Anomaly ahead." The Hornet eased past illustrated scenes of stalwart work gangs enjoying picnics in lush gardens, and of knights in the Celestial Empire hunting vicious packs of Coelophysis. It nosed through a hatch its camera making a sweep of a huge cavity carved out of the central decks of the ship. In this space floated a big object like a tumorous ovoid mass. In a way, the mass was darker than the lightless interior. His eyes told him it was solid, but an instinct deep in his mind whispered it was liquid, confined by a transparent outer skin. Its contents were moving in a way his suite of sensors could not quite register. Even seeing it through the step back of the Hornet's camera made him queasy. "What is that?" he asked. "That is the first smart question I've heard you ask since you came aboard," said the commander. "It's a canoe anchor. Have you never seen one before? Don't they do a unit at the Royal Academy on the mysterious history of Argosy technology?" "A canoe anchor? Like a channel buoy and lighthouse combined? That kind of a canoe anchor?" The chief's shoulders heaved. The man was laughing silently. Gui-Alcera hid her mouth with a hand. The commander had the bland expression of an even-tempered person who has been done with your shit for a while, but is only now letting the anvil drop. The truth hit like a kiloton of bricks. "You let me run with general quarters and the whole sweep, knowing we'd find a hulk out here turned by Argosy tech into a canoe anchor? An anchor that's probably been here all along for what? Generations?" "About 300 years, yes," remarked the commander. How she kept up that mockingly deadpan expression he could not fathom. An artifact, really, the last known record of an Argosy fleet arriving in Odrissa's system is 94 Republic years ago during the reign of Queen Marshal Metis, so it's not like there's much risk getting close up like this. McKinday was still struggling with the surge of adrenaline. You knew! You pranked me on purpose." The commander cleared her throat and with a wave of her hand signaled the others to politely look away. "Listen, Ensign, I get that no honorable wants to be stuck patrolling a heavens-forsaken terminus on an outdated dump of a picket ship, but we're here so the central systems don't get hit with a surprise attack. The pickets didn't do a good enough job a year ago in Molosia system, did they? Do you want to be them? Or do you want to make sure we don't miss a fiend invasion?" No, you misunderstand me. No need to apologize." The chief cocked a startled gaze at him. "I'm in awe. That was perfectly played. You didn't even plan it in advance. You just ran with it. I have so much respect for a good practical joke," he said, and then began to laugh. After a moment, the others broke into laughter as well, a long-awaited release. He even had to wipe his eyes. "The smile looks good on you, Ensign," said Gui-Alcera. "You should try it again sometime." He rubbed away his tears as he considered the Sunbird's crew. The commander, whose wheeled braces mostly hid the damage done to her legs in battle years ago, the chief, who preferred signing and messaging to speaking through the vocoder in his neck, Gui-Alcera, who, like so many of the reserves, had interrupted retirement to take routine patrol and desk duty so younger people could go to the front lines. He'd been digging so hard into his own grievances that he hadn't given the respect due their loyal service. "I guess I have been kind of a jerk," he said. The chief shot him a look, then glanced at the commander, who looked up at Gui-Alcera, who said, "If you open up to people, they won't think you're stuck up." "People think I'm stuck up?" He scratched at his shaved short hair, stunned by this observation. His cohort couldn't get a party started without him and Dozer. "What are they supposed to think when you're an honorable who won't talk to any of us citizens, who hides in your cabin, which you don't have to share because we're short-handed?" A solo cabin had been the only lucky break of this junkyard venture. He wondered if he would ever trust anyone on this ship enough to reveal Dozer. "With respect, Ensign, I've got a clutch of grandchildren more or less your age, and you remind me." She broke off as a comms pinged, delivering a message. This is Mocker, headed your way. We identify you as Sunbird. Please acknowledge. Please acknowledge. The commander scratched her head. Pretty sure Mocker is a courier. What are they doing out here? Acknowledge receipt of their message and ask. She broke off as everyone's eyes turned to the Hornet feed. The mass began to glow with a sullen color. Although it wasn't really a color, it was a translation of the Hornet's feed into a visual fit for human comprehension. Dozer's voice blurted into Mackinday's ear on their personal link. Boss, danger, alert. Shit, swore the commander. Get us out of here. General quarters, all hands batten down. Seal your vac suits. The alarm blared as faceplates hissed into place. The chief flipped the short-range thrusters and slammed the little ship with a series of bursts. The force shoved Mackinday into his chair. Pressure squeezed his lungs. The glow flashed, whiting out the Hornet's feed. After a second, a brief image returned of the cavity's walls slewing past as the little drone tumbled. The view jerked sideways and went black. A pulse surged off the distant hulk, spiking all their sensors. Finally, they began to move away, picking up speed. The shockwave raced after them. 1 minute, 2. What happens when it hits us? Mackinday choked out. No one answered. Maybe they didn't know. Or maybe they were veterans doing everything they could to secure and protect the ship with no time to answer pointless questions. 4 minutes, 8, 16, 32, 33. A massive jolt rattled Mackinday's teeth. His head whacked back against his chair. The ship's torch drive shuddered and died before it could stabilize the vessel. Sensors snapped out, but life support held as the ship rolled in a backward pitch through a slow motion reverse tumble. With gravity loss, only the straps held them in. T-bulbs floated, liquid sloshing inside. Boss? Doze, you okay? Fun, this is fun. You okay? We shouldn't have been so close. The sensor array rerouted through emergency power and lit back up. Mackinday's console displayed the pulse as it expanded away from them into space, a ripple of energy across the vast ocean of night. The Sunbird reached a 180 in relation to where it had started and began to pitch back, bringing the main view around back toward the wreck. Holy hells, will you look at that, Guialsura said. The central region of space was gone, replaced by an object so large Mackinday couldn't make sense of its glittering lights and cliff-like wall until he realized space wasn't gone. Space had never left. A gigantic ship had appeared as if in an eye blink, rather like a magician's hat trick, but really just a perceptual artifact of canoe drives. The effect was hugely disconcerting and utterly terrifying. Mackinday shifted in his chair to make sure he hadn't peed in his vac suit, which fortunately he had not, even if he was a little damp around the crotch. The ship was not alone. Of course it wasn't. The 1,000 or so extra lights were smaller vessels. He'd never thought to see the pulse of a canoe entry with his own eyes. Staring in wonderment and dismay, the commander breathed. That's a Titan-class Argosy mothership and its entire tow chain. We are so fucked. And that's the chapter.
Thank you. That was wonderful. Now, again, the name of that novel and when it's coming out.
Furious Heaven. And it's coming out on April 18th, I think. I mean, it's April, okay. And I think it's April 18th.
So people can watch this
again.
People can watch this again. In order to get...
Yeah, and it's...
Yeah, and in order to get the reading
I will
there.
say one thing. So this is book 2 in a trilogy, but I worked very hard with the first book to bring it to the first book functions like you can read it and come to the end and you feel like you reached a satisfying place. And then hopefully you also would like to read more. And one of the things I did with this book is I also tried to start it. I tried to run that balance between starting it as if for people who had read the first book, but also for people who hadn't. So I try to like, and its story shape is complete in itself as well. It also comes to a satisfying place, but hopefully you'll want more. Yeah. So it doesn't have a cliffhanger ending. Neither of the books has a cliffhanger ending, but there's unfinished business. Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't read the first book yet, so I'm going to have to do that first, and then I'll catch up.
Tor.
And who's publishing?
The Keeper. The Keeper 6
Tor.
is
So
Tor.
both books are Tor.
And Furious Heaven is Tor Books. So Macmillan, but 2 different imprints within that.
Yeah, but
somewhere
same people
up there,
writing the check. So, I mean, yeah, and there's some Tor has like so many more imprints.
They do, yeah.
Now, so I don't. They just started a new one. We should just tell people that if you would like to ask Kate Elliott any questions, you can go to the chat channel on either Facebook or YouTube and type them in, and Amy Goldschlager will pass them along to Barbara and I and me, and we'll pass it along to Kate. So let's see here. No, wait. It's not. Oh, okay, fine. I have to lean forward to read
that's why I move my glasses up and down my face.
Yeah. Good reading, by the way, may I say. Very good reading and good visual on it. I like the way that you look up at the camera at appropriate moments, as in proper storytelling. So Amy Goldschlager, it would seem, is getting circular and asking a question herself, which was, what was your inspiration to write a gender-flipped Alexander the Great? She's referring to an earlier book, obviously. Are there other fictional Alexander-inspired works that you like, e.g. the anime Reign the Conqueror, which is a favorite of Amy's?
So to be clear, Furious Heaven is book 2 of a trilogy.
On screen?
Oh, I'm sorry. So
sorry, go on.
I'll keep talking. Okay, so Furious Heaven is book 2.
I'll be right back.
What's called the Sun Chronicles.
Public.
It's not public.
She didn't.
Book 2 that.
Okay.
So the Sun Chronicles is the gender-flipped Alexander the Great in space trilogy. The first book is Unconquerable Sun. Furious Heaven is book 2, and I'm working on book 3 now. So this is all part of the same trilogy. And I'm sorry, go ahead.
I feel. I was just going to make a snarky remark saying, what do you do in your spare time?
That's what I do in my spare time. Yeah. And
right.
And last year, just in my spare time, I wrote a standalone romantic fantasy novel just to do it. So I don't know. It's just I have a lot of time right now at this moment because my kids are grown up. So I have to tell you that I've always been interested or fascinated by Alexander the Great because what a story, first of all, plus he dies young, and that's always great because it means all the mess ups, all the fuck ups he was going to make when he got older, we'll never know those. So he himself personally never lost a battle. He had one unit or division of his army that lost a battle, but the chain of command wasn't clear and he wasn't there. So, that's a pretty good success record. He conquered half the world, or at least he conquered the Persian Empire, who had conquered half the world. So he kind of inherited that from them. And then it all fell apart after he died. So the inspiration
and Egypt, didn't he also capture Egypt?
Yeah, but Egypt, see, here's don't start me down the history rabbit hole. See, Egypt hated the Persians. So they were super happy for him to arrive. And they were like, hi there, come on in, throw the Persians out. We love you. You can be Pharaoh, whatever, right? Just Persians gone. So I have and my eldest child, and then I have twin boys. And the older one is named Alexander. If you know your Alexander history, you will know that the first through the breach of the twins was the one named Alexander. And he's actually in the Navy now and gave me a lot of help writing the appropriate military naval stuff for this series. Yeah. So anything that feels right about the military stuff is literally due to him, because he knows that because he's there. He does it. As far as I know, he's not interested in conquering the world, though. Thank goodness. That would be very exhausting. But that's not really where the story comes from. Really, the story comes from me doing research on the Ptolemaic Egypt for Court of Fives, which is the young adult fantasy, which has nothing to do with Alexander the Great. But I was using that the Greek-Roman control of Egypt is my template for that world. So you have a girl whose father is it's not an alternate Earth. It's a complete secondary world. But the setup is that her father is essentially the conquerors, and her mother is one of the locals, the indigenous people, and that they've had these children, these 4 girls together, and then all this stuff happens anyway. But I read a lot about the Ptolemies, who, I got to tell you, the later Ptolemies were some of the most awful people you could imagine. Cleopatra was okay. And the founder, Ptolemy, who was one of Alexander's companions and generals, was, okay insofar as any of those people weren't, rapacious and power hungry and grubbing for money and fighting each other all the time and causing untold destruction. But that aside, they weren't as awful as the middle Ptolemies, because they were all named Ptolemy and Cleopatra and Berenike and Eurydice, and they were awful people. And so that got me interested in what happened to Alexander's empire after Alexander died, because his generals fought over it in an appalling way for 30 years before they finally kind of settled down into several 3 to 4 to 5, depending, distinct kingdoms, which then continued to fight on and off, just not as much. And I got interested in writing. I thought, they're called the successors. I thought, successors in space, that would be interesting. But then first I would have to, but part of the problem of writing this story is Alexander is like he's like a black hole, right? He sucks in all the light. So even after he died in the early years, if they held meetings, the Council of Generals, they would set up his throne and put his armor on the throne, and then they would meet in front of that. You couldn't get away from him. So as I thought about how I wanted to do this, I thought, well, we have to at least meet my Alexander analog. And then all of a sudden, because it was the Alexander analog that took over. So there was, and I don't want to say more than that. But anyway, so the first 2 books are about this character. And then the reason I wanted to gender swap it was very specific. It's because, I need to pause here and say that, I write a lot of, especially back in the day, I was very clear about wanting to write a lot of women into the stories that I loved as a girl. And when I was a girl, you rarely saw women in the science fiction and fantasy adventure stories that I read. And if they were, they had very limited roles. And those roles were limited both in what roles they could have, but also in the way those roles were portrayed, right? So when I began writing, I said, well, I'm going to write women into these stories, and both in roles that we consider masculine roles, but also showing them in roles that, also saying that this, women's work can be important and interesting in ways that these older stories never took seriously or never thought about, showing. So like in the Crossroads trilogy, the one that starts with Spirit Gate, the main character is a young woman who's very, and I dislike this word, but it's the best one I have. She adheres to the traditional feminine role of her society, right? And she's very much the hero, and she never steps outside that. She doesn't learn to fight with a knife to prove that she's, whatever. And she's super important, and the things she does are important. So with that caveat, and the Giron stories also focus about women running things and how important that is, right? So, but in this case, I wanted to show a woman as a charismatic military leader in a society that didn't find that at all unusual, and that never questioned her ability to lead and to be a charismatic and to be like the most brilliant person of their time, which is what Alexander was. No one said to him, "Oh, you're a dude. How can you be king?" Right? Well, of course he could be king. He had proven himself in battle, and people followed him. They put his armor on the throne after he was dead and held meetings in front of him. And I wanted to let that roll, put a woman in that role. So that is the character's Sun. So Unconquerable Sun is named after her, the first book, and then Furious Heaven goes on with the story, and now I'm working on book 3. So that's why I wrote it.
It sounds like it would make a great, like streaming series or movie or something, if given to the right director.
Sure.
I can even name the director that comes to my mind. That's Patty Jenkins, who did Wonder Woman with Gal Gadot and is doing Cleopatra with Gal Gadot. So
it'll be interesting. Cleopatra's a really fascinating person who has too often been, anyway, I don't want to get into the, she's the women in the Ptolemaic dynasty often co-ruled as equally powerful queens to often their brothers, because they were really interested in not sharing power. And she was a very fascinating, intelligent, and smart, savvy person who had the bad fortune to be born at a time when the Romans were basically unbeatable. So, I mean, in the long term, not
the bad fortune to have her story told by Hollywood.
I've watched the Liz Taylor, and it's not as bad as I thought it would be. It does fall into a lot of those things, but at least she's portrayed as being savvy.
Yes.
Politically.
Yeah. I was very surprised when I saw it. I mean, I thought it was overlong, but I did enjoy it. But I think probably my favorite, no doubt historically inaccurate depiction is the George Bernard Shaw, where Caesar first comes up, and it's Vivian Leigh.
I haven't seen that one, but I wanted to. I wanted to actually add one more thing to Amy's question. So if I was influenced by, I don't actually read a lot of Alexander literature. I read the history mostly, but the anime that probably most influenced me, that I know that definitely most influenced me, is Legend of the Galactic Heroes. Not the old one, not the remake, which I've seen the whole thing, and which is a really fascinating study of a space conqueror, someone who is a young man in this case, who is just ambitious in this way that is very difficult to get at, right? Because it's almost unfathomable. And that story is made particularly interesting because he is set against a brilliant general from the other side, who is the only one who can match him. Anyway, so Legend of the Galactic Heroes is a great anime. It's like 120 episodes, I think.
Nah, that's okay.
Yeah.
I don't
And this
know
is the old one.
animes
It's the one from the 80s, not the remake.
Okay. Do you know where I can watch it?
I couldn't tell you because my son found fan sub versions and I watched it with him. And so I don't know where he got them. And there's no official release that I know of, only fan sub versions.
Yeah, probably. But as long as they're fan subbed as opposed to fan dubbed, I'm okay with that.
Oh yeah, no, it's not. There's no. I don't listen to.
Yeah,
I don't like dubbing.
I'm same here. Two things. Let me tell the audience that if you have any questions, feel free to write them in the chat channel. And Amy may capture them and pass them along to me. But Amy has done that herself. And she has another question for you, which says, and now it's on screen, I'm also interested in the role of mothers as hero protagonists. The protagonist of Shannon Chakrabarty's upcoming novel, The Adventures of, and scrolled off the screen, of Amina El-Sarraf, is also a mother and a pirate captain. Why is it important for mothers to... It keeps scrolling. So why is it important for mothers to be heroes? And ellipsis.
So I have read The Adventures of Amina El-Sarraf. It's fabulous, and I recommend everyone who is interested in that kind of thing. That's fine. That's fine. So I used to, back in the day, the characters who were female this is not universally true, but it did seem like they often seemed to fall into wombs or vaginas, right? They were either someone you could have sex with, or they were someone who gave birth to a man or a boy, someone who would be important later, or they would be, or the other side of that, or the extended element of that is there were caretakers. So the mother was the mother, the aunt was the caretaker of the hero. And then there was a woman he could have, or women he could have sex with. And I think it's important to show that adults are human beings, and that being a mother is, I'm a mom, and it's a crucial part of my identity, but it's not the only part of my identity. And I like stories that show people as having a full range of themselves, right? Who they are. And I think that's that's why I think it's important to show mothers. So Esther in The Keeper 6, Esther it happens to be her role as a mother, which catapults her into this specific adventure. But it's clear from the story that she has a whole other life, that she has many other things that she knows about, that she's good at and not good at, and other ways to understand herself, not just as a mom, but also, and also, of course, Esther's older. I never state her age, but one can imagine she's in her late 50s or early 60s or thereabouts, right? And to show that people can still, they can make decisions, they can be in charge of people, not in a bossy, nagging way. I want to add that in book 1, Unconquerable Sun, one of the major secondary characters is Queen Marshal Irene, who's Princess Sun's mother. And of course, she's a gender-flipped version of Philip, who was Alexander's father. They had a very complicated relationship because they were both very ambitious and assertive men. And of course, and that can create stress. But at the same time, Philip needed someone capable to follow him, because they lived in a war culture. You had to, in those days, it would often, for example, Philip became king after his 2 older brothers died. And then it's a little more complicated than that, but you needed an adult. He had a nephew who was very young. But that nephew couldn't lead armies, and Philip had to lead the army. So you had to be able to lead the army, and that meant you were at risk of dying. So you needed an heir who could lead the armies. And Alexander first went into battle when he was, I don't know, 16 or 17, I'm assuming. I don't have my date book to look at the moment. And he proved himself that he could function in battle. And so, but what was interesting to me in gender flipping Philip was a fascinating, complicated character. Talk about realpolitik. This is a man who knew what he had to do to get done what he needed to do, because Macedonia wasn't in a great position in his day. And he basically lifted it out from becoming practically an Athenian colony. So he did a lot. People often say he built the army that Alexander conquered with, and that is to a large extent true. But it was interesting to write Irene, the woman, and Sun, the princess, the daughter, because a few readers felt that the story was very young adult because Sun wanted her mother's approval. And to me, there's something a little sexist in that. If Sun had wanted her father's approval, or if Sun had been a boy and wanted his father's approval, that would have been considered normal. I am a young
Everybody
heir.
would say, hey, great. Yeah,
I'm the young heir. I know my father, who's a legend in his own time. I just want him to say, you're all right. I see you. I'm proud of you, right? That would have been considered fine. But there was something about, for some readers, not all, that about if a mother, then that it's infantilizing, because mother's approval only matters if you're a child. And that's, to me, incredibly sexist. And so I enjoyed writing that relationship, because I also felt it pushed back a little bit about that. And so I hope that there's a trend in fantasy to show people in a wider range of roles,
Well, maybe you're helping establish a trend.
Well, I mean, I don't think I'm establishing that much. I think I'm part of what is going on today. And I'm glad to be. I'm proud to be.
Yeah, but not enough of it. There will be more. One hopes, but I think back. Heck, I started doing Hour of the Wolf, which Margot Adler, a woman, started in 1971.
Wow.
And the number of women protagonists that you could find now, bearing in mind that one of our co-workers was a woman named Joanna Russ. But aside from that, we didn't have that many women protagonists being written in the field. People actually went after Le Guin about that, in Left Hand of Darkness. Why is it so gender neutral? Things come around, and now they see the gender neutral thing as being okay. But it is time for that trend to stop being a trend and to start being what people read and write and adapt.
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot more of it in the last 5 years. I'm just throwing that number out there randomly. And the Chakraborty book is a great example.
Yes, her stuff is wonderful, absolutely wonderful. She did one of these events.
Did she?
When her first book was it City of Brass? Yeah, just as that one was coming out, and I did not know her, so when I met her, the last name threw me off. This woman is Irish. But she's married to a gentleman named Chakraborty. So it's like, okay, that makes it so much more interesting. Throw in a few more cultures for me, don't you? Why don't you? Where are you doing much of your research?
See those books?
Yes,
books.
I can't quite read the titles.
Yeah.
We saw Barbara and I saw a YouTube thing today, about 20 minutes long, from some guy talking history, and he made very sure that the books behind him had thick spines, so that everybody watching could read, and they were all history books.
So I also have an old friend of mine who's an Alexander the Great the court of Alexander the Great era scholar who is a professor at one of not University of Nebraska, Omaha. And so she is one of my beta readers. And she influenced me a lot in how I address some of the, because when you take a historical story and flip it into science fiction or fantasy, you have to decide what you're going to leave in, what you're going to take out, how you're going to adapt it to that. And in some ways, I hew pretty closely to the Alexander story, but although it's not always clear. And in other ways, I had to say like, well, I can't have this character in because that's too many characters. There's already so many characters because Alexander was surrounded by all these people. That's just how, that would be how he lived, right? And you can't just have him be this solo Rambo-like character striding across because it doesn't work. And it's also simply not true at all, remotely, to the way he lived. But also in terms of events, I've translated things, and I had to keep, I'm going to keep this incident in, but I can't find a room for that incident. And how am I going to do the Gordian knot? I can't do it. I don't want to do it straight because it doesn't work. So is there another way I can do it that people reading closely will go, oh, that's a reference to the Gordian knot, So there is one. Mm-hmm. There are actually two alternative references to the Gordian knot story in Furious Heaven, which won't always be noticeable. And there's a lot of, how many analog characters do I use? But she helped me a lot with some of the decisions I made about things like how to address or how to deal with Hephaestion, who is also gender flipped, and how I wanted to approach him, because there's a lot of he was Alexander's closest friend, possibly, although there's no proof, but I think they might have had a romantic relationship. They could have been lovers. Definitely, he was the person who Alexander relied on emotionally. And there's and also how I dealt with Olympias, who, there's a lot of male scholars who just hate her. They call her terrible names. That's Alexander's mother, because she was dealing with a culture where she had to be tough, for her son to survive and become king. And so, so anyway, there's a lot of decisions. So partly I filter things through her, partly I use my son's knowledge of military matters and naval matters to try to make the fleet elements seem realistic insofar as they're in space. The science of how the beacons work and the canoe drive of the torch drive, that's the space opera. That's just meant to be consistent within the world. It's not meant to be scientific. Although the canoe drive, the KNNU canoe drive, which has an expanded thing. I have a friend of mine who's a physicist, made up some really great gobbledygook words to describe it, which I reference. And it's fabulous because she could come up with something that was like, sure, that sounds good to me. I don't know.
But I think that the use of the word canoe, I suspect, comes directly from you.
KNNU, yeah. It stands for. She came up with what each letter stands for, but I can't remember.
Yeah, it's an acronym.
It's written in my notebook, right? I have a notebook where I write everything, so I can remember it.
Oh, that's very cool. Yeah. But that was also just a way of mentioning. Now, are you still doing canoe rigging and all that?
I do still paddle outriggers, canoes, CANOE, or va'a, as you would say in Hawaiian. Yes, I do paddle. In fact, I will be headed out to paddle today after this interview.
Yes, it's evening here in New York. We wouldn't do that, and especially not a good idea to do that in New York anyway.
Oh no, I've raced in New York.
Really? Oh yeah, but that would be organized,
Oh
right?
yeah. Yes, but it
Yeah.
was quite exciting. I don't know if they're still running it, but for some years, there's an outrigger canoe club in Manhattan, based in Manhattan. And
Oh yes.
yeah, and they, for a long time, ran a race called the Liberty Race. So it started by, I think, Washington Bridge, and then you go down the one side, and then you cross the river, and then you go back the other side past the Statue of Liberty, thus Liberty Race, and back to where you started. But I raced that, I don't know, about 10 years ago, and it's a
Wow.
great race. It's about 15 miles, but in an OC6, a 6-person canoe. But you're going down, right? And then you've got to cross the Hudson. And let me tell you, you're in this little canoe. Well, it's a big canoe, but it's compared to everything else. You're in this canoe and you head out across. Nobody's stopping for you, right? They're like all the river traffic, and you're going like, okay, move on. It's like, oh my God. It was great.
And they probably have to take into account that it's an estuary, so it changes direction, the water.
Oh, well, that's the steersman's job, not mine. I just paddle. I'm just the grunt labor.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't steer.
Yeah, okay.
But anyway, but then toward the end of the race, you do pass the Statue of Liberty, which is from offshore. Just so it was, anyway, it was great. So there, yeah, you could go paddle, but if it's dark, probably not, and maybe not in the winter. I don't think they paddle in the winter. Here we paddle year round.
Certainly not this winter. We had single-digit temperatures, Fahrenheit, just 3 days ago. So it's cold.
We paddle year round. I mean, about the 2 weeks around between Christmas and New Year's, usually people are too busy. But beyond that,
oh, you're in Honolulu, and you've got volcanoes to warm things up. First Mauna Loa, now Kilauea. So
yeah, but they're on another island. So all we get here is the VOG, is the sulfur.
Oh, I thought I thought they were on the Big Island.
They are. I'm not on the Big Island.
Oh. Pardon me. So Honolulu is on Oahu.
Yeah.
Okay. That's where I screwed it up. Well, typical of me, I'm in Brooklyn and I'm not sure what island I'm on. It's long is all that I know. And we share it with Queens and other counties.
Yeah.
Well, I think that we have hardly begun to scratch the surface of wonderful things to talk about, but I think that we've also run over 75
time.
minutes.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Sorry, that's why I write such long books. I apologize.
Yeah, but for the radio show, it'll be cut down and certain words edited out. No. You should not worry about that. I will find a perfectly good way of doing it. But my show just stops at 10 p.m., where what they call safe harbor, where you can do a disclaimer and broadcast those words, begin. I'm right on the edge. When last you were on the show, about 9 years ago, Lord help me, I was on at 5 a.m., if you recall. Or was it midnight when you were there?
I don't remember.
Well, let's make it less than 9 years before we do another public event.
I think it was 10 because I was there in 2013.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, in June 2013, because that's when Cold Steel came out.
Right. 9.5 years.
9.5. That's right.
I just had a birthday, so I'm taking
happy birthday.
I'm taking every month that I can on the rung of the ladder. So aside from this book, what else do you have coming out?
Well, I mean, I have 2 books this year, which is a lot. Keeper 6 and Furious Heaven. I'm working on book 3 of the trilogy, so that will come out at some point. When I finish it, I have this romantic fantasy on submission that I can't. There's nothing I can say about that right now. And I am hoping, this is actually the first time I'm mentioning it in public. I'm hoping to do a very small press collection of stories from the Spirit Walker universe.
Ooh.
which is the Cold Magic books. I think there's like 11 already written.
Right.
And there's 2 I need to finish. And it would include illustrations. And I'm hoping that might come out in 2024.
Okay.
So that's
So,
where things are right now.
yeah, well, we'll grab any excuse, including not having a new book, but just talking some more, to have you back, either here or just for Hour of the Wolf, just for radio, which
Yeah.
nowadays I do, on video anyway, if the authors are up to it. And you seem very comfortable with being online and talking.
I spent a lot. Haven't we all spent a lot of time online in the last 3 years?
Yeah, haven't we all?
Yeah.
Although actually, I've been doing it longer, but as has
Yeah.
Barbara.
Well, I mean, just in particular, I had done it before, but I had never. But my system, like, I ended up getting a camera, and I ended up getting the landline so now I'm plugged in directly to my router and not through Wi-Fi. So those are all adaptations I made because of the pandemic.
Yeah. And but the quality is great. And here I'm talking about the writing and the reading, but we'll also praise decent technology as allowing us to share that those parts of your life. So I can't wait for, well, the pandemic to be truly over and for you to come back to New York. So, because I don't see a future for me in Hawaii very soon, other than through the webcams that I watch.
Yeah.
And because I look at the volcanoes all the time. So, thank you so much, Kate.
Thank you, and thanks also to your trusty associates,
co-workers, Barbara and Amy.
Barbara and Amy, yes.
Yeah, we can start the bottom crawl, Barbara, if you like, which gives the credits to everybody and also gives an address, an email address or PayPal address to which you can send donations, because running these things are not free for us. We pay for the software. It's not exceedingly expensive, but we're spending $35, $40 a month. And any donations people care to make, well, we'll appreciate it. It's not expected, but it is appreciated. So, Kate, once again, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate you having me on here. And I actually I haven't done a reading for such a long time, and I have to admit, I enjoyed reading that chapter.
No, and it was well read. I enjoyed hearing it.
Oh, so, and the dog is barking. And the dog is now barking, yeah.
So it's unanimous. Okay, so, and let me just tell the viewers, we have not yet booked March and April, but in May we're having Kat Howard, who's another wonderful fantasy writer.
Yeah.
That's K-A-T for anybody who cares to look her up. Okay, so we'll see you, I hope, sooner rather than later.
I hope so, yeah.
And I'll bid everybody farewell for now.
Thank you.
Thank you.